When racist cops cornered a decorated black agent, they saw an easy target. They didn't see the decorated war veteran at her side, her dog, one silent command, and the power dynamic shatters. Their authority is about to meet its match. The late afternoon sun, a benevolent autumn gold, cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Oakhaven Estates as Special Agent Loretta Shaw, retired, took her customary walk. Her purple coat, a vibrant slash of color against the muted tones of falling leaves, was unbuttoned, revealing the discreet but official insignia of a national security strategic advisor pinned to her lapel. Beside her, Shadow, a Belgian Malinois whose sable fur held the same disciplined sheen as his owner's tightly coiled hair, moved with the easy grace of a creature perfectly attuned to his surroundings. His gait was a silent testament to years of military precision, now softened by the quietude of retirement, much like Loretta's own. Oakhaven was an enclave of privilege. Its sprawling homes and meticulously kept gardens, a world away from the gritty urban landscapes where Loretta had forged her formidable career leading anti-terrorist operations. She was here not as a resident, but as a consultant, staying in a guest house owned by a discreet think tank. Her presence, however, in this homogeneous neighborhood of old money and new tech wealth, was, for some, an anomaly. The first police cruiser, a local PD vehicle, slid to a halt a few feet ahead of her, its tires whispering on the asphalt. It was an unnecessarily abrupt stop, a prelude. A second cruiser, appearing as if summoned from the crisp air itself, mirrored the first, effectively bracketing her and Shadow on the sidewalk. Loretta's hand, instinctively, found Shadow's collar. A light touch that was less a restraint and more a silent communication. The dog's ears, large and alert, swiveled towards the officers, but he remained otherwise impassive, a statue of controlled energy. 3 officers emerged, their movements economical and imbued with an authority that felt disproportionate to the placid suburban street. Officer Miller, the first out, was young, his face a mask of stern officiousness that didn't quite conceal an underlying uncertainty. Officer Davies, older, heavier, with a visible air of jaded cynicism, took a wider stance, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. The third, Officer Kensky, remained slightly back, his eyes, like his partner's, fixed on Loretta with an unnerving intensity. "Ma'am," Miller began, his voice a shade too loud in the quiet afternoon, "we've had a report of a suspicious individual in the area." Loretta's eyebrow arched, a subtle movement that conveyed a universe of unasked questions. "Suspicious," she repeated, her tone even, betraying none of the weariness that settled upon her like an old, unwelcome coat. She'd encountered this particular brand of suspicion before. In myriad forms, throughout her life and career, it was a tiresome, predictable script. "You fit the description," Davies interjected, his voice gravelly. He eyed her purple coat, then her face, his gaze lingering with an assessment that felt both invasive and dismissive. The insignia on her lapel, clearly visible, went unacknowledged. "This is a private, residential area, I'm aware," Loretta said, her voice remaining calm, a practiced professional composure honed in far more dangerous arenas than a suburban sidewalk. "I'm taking a walk." "Your ID, ma'am," Miller demanded, stepping closer. Shadow, sensing the officer's approach, emitted a low, almost inaudible rumble from his chest. It wasn't a growl, not yet, but a clear signal of attentiveness. Loretta's fingers tightened fractionally on his collar. "Is there a problem?" "Officers," she asked, her gaze steady, meeting Miller's, then Davies. She knew the procedure. She also knew her rights. But more than that, she knew the subtle, dangerous dance of encounters like these, where perceived defiance, however slight, could escalate a situation with terrifying speed. "The problem, ma'am," Davies said, his patience visibly thinning, "is that you're in an area where you don't seem to belong, and you're acting cagey. We need to see some identification." His hand moved from resting on his weapon to gripping its handle. The accusation, "you don't seem to belong," hung in the air, as potent and offensive as any slur. Loretta felt the familiar tightening in her chest, a mix of anger and profound disappointment. Decades of service, of putting her life on the line for the very system these men represented. And it still came down to this: her skin color, her presence in a nice neighborhood, rendering her inherently suspicious. "I am a guest of the Oak Haven Strategic Institute," Loretta stated, her voice taking on a new edge of formality. "My credentials are—" "We don't care where you say you're a guest," Kensky chimed in from the rear, his voice sharp. "ID, now." The demand was a clear escalation. The pretense of a polite inquiry had vanished, replaced by an undisguised assertion of power. Loretta maintained her outward composure, but inside, a cold anger began to solidify. She had faced down armed insurgents, negotiated with warlords, stared into the eyes of individuals who truly wished her harm. These three officers, puffed up with their local authority and blinded by their prejudice, were a different kind of threat, insidious, demeaning, and a stark reminder that some battles were never truly won. Slowly, deliberately, Loretta reached into her coat pocket. Shadow remained a coiled spring at her side, his gaze unwavering, fixed on Officer Davies, who had now subtly shifted his weight, a classic pre-draw posture. The dog's intelligence was palpable. He was reading the situation with an acuity that surpassed that of the officers. Instead of a wallet, Loretta's fingers closed around a small, discreet device. It was a silent alert, directly linked to a federal security detail, a precaution insisted upon by her current employers. Given the sensitive nature of her work and the lingering threats from her past, she had never used it. Until now, with an almost imperceptible movement, she activated it. "My identification is in my other pocket," she said, her voice still measured, though a new, harder glint had appeared in her eyes. "But before I provide it, I'd like to understand the specific, articulable facts that led you to believe I was acting suspiciously, other than my presence here." She was quoting the legal standard, a test these officers were clearly failing. This assertion of her knowledge, her refusal to be cowed, seemed to further agitate them. Davies took another step forward, his hand now fully on his weapon. "Don't play lawyer with us, lady. You're being evasive. That's suspicious enough for me." Evasive. Loretta's laugh was short, devoid of humor. "Officer, I've been standing here, answering your questions, while being surrounded and implicitly threatened. The only evasion I see is your refusal to acknowledge my right to be here without harassment." From the corner of her eye, Loretta saw movement a few houses down. A curtain twitched in a window. Then a figure emerged onto a porch, phone held up, unmistakably recording. Good, Loretta thought. Evidence. A witness. The dynamics of the encounter were shifting, though the officers, lost in their own aggressive tunnel vision, seemed oblivious. "All right, that's enough," Miller declared, his youthful face flushed with a mixture of adrenaline and anger. He unclipped his handcuffs. "You're obstructing our investigation. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Loretta stood her ground. "On what grounds am I being detained?" "Officer Miller, what crime have I committed?" Shadow, who had remained preternaturally still, now shifted his weight, his muscles bunching. A soft whine, a sound of deep unease, escaped him. He looked up at Loretta, his intelligent eyes questioning. "The dog seems agitated," Kensky observed, his own nervousness evident in the way he kept glancing at Shadow. "Maybe it's aggressive." "He's a retired military working dog." "Officer," Loretta said, her voice like ice, "trained to a level you can't possibly comprehend. And he's picking up on your aggression." The words were a warning, but also a statement of fact. Davies scoffed. "Military dog, sure. Looks like a pit bull mix to me. Probably dangerous." It was a willfully ignorant, racially coded assessment of Deutschem, equating a highly trained service animal with a stereotyped inner-city threat simply because of its association with a black woman. The insult to Shadow, in a way, was more infuriating to Loretta than the personal affronts. It was a denigration of his service, his discipline, his very being. You are making a serious mistake. Officers, Loretta said, her voice low and resonant with a lifetime of command. You are escalating a situation based on nothing but your own biases. I suggest you reconsider your next actions very carefully. Miller, however, was committed. He reached for Loretta's arm. Last chance. Ma'am, it was the moment everything pivoted. Loretta didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply made a small, almost imperceptible hand gesture near Shadow's head. A sign. A coded command that was part of a language only she and the dog understood. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply moved, with a speed that was astonishing. A blur of controlled power. He stepped between Loretta and Officer Miller, planting himself firmly, his body a solid, unmovable barrier. Then, and only then, did he emit a sound, a deep, resonant bark that was not aggressive, but unequivocally assertive. It was a sound that spoke of boundaries, of protection, of absolute capability. It was the bark of a beast trained for war. Now standing sentinel on a suburban lawn, Miller recoiled as if struck, his hand falling away from Loretta, Davies, and Kensky, startled by the sudden, decisive action and the sheer presence of the dog. Froze, their aggressive postures momentarily forgotten. For a beat, the only sound was Shadow's controlled, commanding bark echoing in the quiet afternoon air, a sound that unequivocally declared thus far, and no further. The public humiliation was now on the precipice of a dramatic, unforeseen shift. The sudden authoritative presence of Shadow had fractured the officer's aggressive momentum. Miller, who had been reaching for Loretta, stumbled back half a step, his face paling. Davies, his hand still on his holstered weapon, now seemed uncertain whether to draw it or raise his hands. Kensky, further back, simply stared, his mouth slightly agape. The suburban quiet, moments before punctuated by their accusatory tones, was now filled with a tense silence, broken only by Shadow's low, controlled rumble, a continuous assertion of his readiness. Loretta did not use the momentary paralysis to escalate. Instead, her voice, when she spoke, was colder, sharper, slicing through the tension. I believe I asked you for the specific, articulable facts justifying this stop. You have yet to provide them. You have, however, accused me of being suspicious based on my appearance, attempted to unlawfully detain me, and disparaged a highly decorated military service animal. Each word was delivered with precision, the indictment of a prosecutor laying out an irrefutable case. It was Davies who recovered first, his face flushing with renewed belligerence, a desperate attempt to reclaim lost authority. That dog is a menace. You're creating a public disturbance with an aggressive animal. He gestured vaguely towards the distant neighbor. Still filming, we're well within our rights to handle a dangerous dog situation. The words, aggressive animal, dangerous one, struck a discordant chord deep within Loretta, resonating with an older, colder memory. It wasn't just the insult to Shadow's impeccable training and discipline. It was the casual, prejudiced dismissal, the swift labeling based on appearance and association rather than fact. It was a familiar pattern, one that had cost her dearly years ago. The manicured lawns of Oakhaven Estates momentarily faded, replaced by the damp, fetid air of a warehouse on the Baltimore docks. Nearly 30 years prior, Loretta, then a rookie FBI agent, barely 6 months out of Quantico, idealistic and fiercely determined, had been part of a task force investigating a human trafficking ring. Her partner for that particular raid was Marcus Showtime Jones, a black agent 5 years her senior, flamboyant, brilliant, and often underestimated by their predominantly white colleagues due to his race and unconventional methods. He had an uncanny ability to go undercover, to blend and extract information where others failed. They had a solid lead, an informant's tip about a shipment of victims arriving that night, but the senior agent in charge, a man named Henderson, a veteran with a reputation for by-the-book procedure and a barely concealed disdain for agents like Marcus, had dismissed Marcus's urgent, street-level intel about a change in location. Henderson preferred satellite imagery and a cleaner approach, which, in this case, meant relying on outdated schematics and ignoring Marcus's insistence that the traffickers were using a decoy site while the real operation was a mile further downriver. "Your source, Jones," Henderson had sneered in the briefing, his eyes flicking dismissively over Marcus, "is probably as reliable as a $3 bill. We stick to the primary target. We don't go chasing ghosts based on gut feelings." The implicit message was clear. Marcus's intel, derived from his deep undercover work in the black community, was somehow less valid, less professional. Loretta, young and still believing in the inherent integrity of the Bureau, had spoken up, defending Marcus's track record, the specificity of his information. Henderson had cut her off with a curt, "Your loyalty is noted, Agent Shaw, but stick to what you know. This is a primary target operation." She had felt the sting of that dismissal, the implication that she, too, was out of her depth, perhaps tainted by her association with Marcus. She had remained silent after that, a knot of frustration and unease tightening in her gut. She endured the condescension, telling herself the mission's success was paramount. During the raid on the decoy warehouse, everything went wrong. It was a setup, a violent ambush. 2 agents were wounded. Marcus, frustrated and knowing they were in the wrong place, had tried to convince Henderson, even as gunfire erupted, to redeploy to the location he'd identified. Henderson, his face a mask of stubborn pride, refused, shouting about maintaining operational integrity. Later, much later, after the K and the recriminations, they found out Marcus had been right. The traffickers, alerted by the botched raid on the decoy, had rerouted. The victims were lost, spirited away. The official report, carefully worded by Henderson and his allies, blamed unforeseen operational complexities and, implicitly, the unreliable intelligence that had caused initial confusion. A subtle, bureaucratic knife in Marcus's back. Marcus had tried to fight it, to make them see. He prepared a detailed counter-report, meticulously outlining his intel, Henderson's refusal to act on it, and the catastrophic consequences. Loretta had been his sole corroborating witness from within the task force. She had the choice: support Marcus, challenge Henderson in the official narrative, and risk her nascent career, or remain silent, protect herself, and live with the knowledge of injustice. She remembered the immense pressure, the closed-door meetings where senior agents, men who looked like Henderson, spoke of loyalty to the Bureau, of not airing dirty laundry, of the long-term career implications for a young black female agent who was seen as disruptive. The painful truth was that Marcus, for all his brilliance, was expendable to them. And she, if she wasn't careful, would be too. She had chosen to support Marcus, providing a sworn affidavit. The internal investigation was a whitewash. Henderson was cleared, his judgment deemed reasonable under pressure. Marcus was informally sidelined, transferred to a desk job in a backwater field office, his career effectively neutered. Loretta received a letter of counsel in her file, a warning about judgment and teamwork. She endured the whispers, the cold shoulders, the subtle but pervasive message that she had backed the wrong horse, that she had broken an unwritten rule. The pain of that past wasn't just Marcus's professional crucifixion or the escape of the traffickers. It was the chilling realization of how easily truth could be suppressed by prejudice and power, how a system designed for justice could so readily protect its own, even at the cost of its integrity. It taught her a bitter lesson: raw courage and righteous anger were not enough. To fight such ingrained biases, one needed irrefutable evidence, strategic positioning, and an unshakable control over one's own reactions. Outbursts were dismissed as emotional, quiet. Meticulous dismantling was far more effective. She had learned to endure, to observe, to gather her strength and choose her battles with surgical precision. The memory, sharp and cold, receded. leaving Loretta back on the sun-dappled Oak Haven sidewalk, facing three officers whose arrogance and prejudice mirrored Henderson's in a sickeningly familiar way. Davies's accusation about Shadow being a dangerous dog was the same dismissive tactic, the same refusal to see value in training because of the handler's race. Loretta's eyes, hard as flint, met Davies. "This animal," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than any shout, "has served this country with more distinction than you could ever imagine. He has saved lives, including the lives of men who wore uniforms like yours. Your ignorance is not an excuse for misconduct." Shadow, as if sensing the shift in Loretta's emotional state, the dredging up of old pain, pressed subtly against her leg, a silent reassurance. He was still alert, still a barrier, but his low rumble had softened, a gesture of solidarity. "Now, for the last time," Loretta continued, her gaze sweeping over all three officers, "are you going to provide a lawful basis for this detention, or are you going to compound your errors?" Her hand remained near her pocket, where the activated federal alert was a silent, ticking clock. She wasn't thinking of Marcus's fate as a defeat, but as a lesson etched into her very core. He had been denied evidence-based justice. She would ensure she was not. Her endurance then had been forced upon her. Her endurance now was a strategy, a prelude to a decisive response she knew was already in motion. The humiliation she was currently facing would not be buried in a sanitized report. This time, there would be witnesses, there would be recordings, and there would be consequences for those who wielded their authority with such reckless prejudice. The past was a painful teacher, but it had armed her for precisely such a moment. The standoff, taut and fragile, was shattered not by a renewed aggression from the local police, but by the distant, yet rapidly approaching, wail of different sirens, sharper, more insistent than the familiar yelp of the Oak Haven PD. Within minutes, two black SUVs, unmarked but radiating an unmistakable federal presence, swept onto the quiet street, their tires crunching decisively on the gravel driveway of a nearby mansion before disgorging four agents. These men and women moved with a quiet, disciplined urgency that made the local officers' earlier bluster seem almost amateurish. Special Agent Ramirez, the lead federal agent, a compact man with intelligent eyes and an air of no-nonsense efficiency, approached Loretta directly, his gaze briefly acknowledging Shadow before focusing respectfully on her. "Agent Shaw, are you unharmed?" His use of her former title was deliberate, a recognition of her status that the local officers had pointedly ignored. "Unharmed, Ramirez." "But unimpressed," Loretta replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. She gestured towards Miller, Davies, and Kensky, who now looked profoundly uncomfortable, their earlier arrogance deflating like a punctured tire. These officers of the Oak Haven Police Department were in the process of detaining me without cause, apparently because my presence and my coat were deemed suspicious in this neighborhood. Ramirez's expression didn't change, but a certain hardness entered his eyes as he turned to the three officers. "Your names and badge numbers, now." His tone brooked no argument. The local cops, suddenly diminished, recited their details. Another federal agent meticulously recorded them, along with the license plates of their cruisers. The neighbor, who had continued filming, now had an even more compelling scene to document the swift, authoritative intervention of federal power. The subsequent interaction was a study in contrasts. Where the local officers had been accusatory and presumptive, the federal agents were methodical and fact-oriented. Ramirez took Loretta's brief statement, his questions precise. He reviewed the insignia on her coat without comment, its significance clearly understood. He made a point of asking about Shadow, not as a threat, but as a companion, noting his calm demeanor once the immediate perceived threat from the local officers had been neutralized by the federal arrival. The Oak Haven PD officers were separated and questioned briefly, their attempts to justify their actions, to paint Loretta as uncooperative or Shadow as potentially aggressive, crumbled under Ramirez's focused interrogation and the undeniable evidence of Loretta's credentials in the ongoing video recording from the neighbor. The power dynamic had inverted completely. Davies, in particular, looked apoplectic, his face a mottled red, but he remained sullenly silent when Ramirez coolly advised them that a formal inquiry would be initiated by the Department of Justice regarding their conduct. Within 30 minutes, the local cruisers departed, their retreat far less dramatic than their arrival. The federal agents offered Loretta an escort, which she politely declined. "I am perfectly capable of completing my walk. Ramirez, thank you." Her gaze was steely. She would not be driven from public space by incompetence or prejudice. As the SUVs departed, leaving Loretta in shadow once more in the quiet autumn afternoon, a surface-level resolution seemed to have been achieved. The immediate threat was gone. The offending officers were on notice. Yet, Loretta felt no sense of triumph, only a familiar weariness and a growing disquiet. The swiftness of the federal response was due to her specific, high-level connections, a privilege unavailable to most. What happened to those who couldn't summon a federal rapid response team with a discreet button press in the days that followed? Loretta attempted to immerse herself in her work at the Oak Haven Strategic Institute. The institute, housed in a discreet, ivy-covered building on the edge of the affluent enclave, prided itself on its cutting-edge analysis and its influence in the corridors of power. Her role was to advise on emergent global threats, a task requiring intense focus and intellectual rigor. Yet, the incident cast a long shadow. News of the encounter, as it was euphemistically termed, reached Dr. Alastair Finch, the Institute's director, a man whose public pronouncements championed equality and justice but whose private demeanor prioritized institutional reputation above all else. In a carefully worded meeting, Finch expressed his sincere concern for Loretta's unpleasant experience. He also, however, subtly probed whether the matter could be resolved quietly. "When the Oak Haven PD chief has already reached out to me, unofficially, of course," Finch explained, steepling his fingers. "He's deeply apologetic, assures me his officers will receive additional sensitivity training. He's concerned about the optics. Naturally, as are we, Loretta, we value our relationship with the local community, including law enforcement." Loretta listened, her expression unreadable. "Dr. Finch," she stated, her voice even. "3 of his officers racially profiled me, attempted an unlawful detention, and would have likely escalated to physical force had I not. 1, possessed a direct line to federal intervention, and 2, had shadow with me. This isn't an optics issue, it's a systemic failure, an abuse of authority. Sensitivity training is a band-aid on a bullet wound if there's no genuine accountability." Finch shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, of course, accountability is paramount. But these processes, they can be lengthy, contentious. The Institute prefers to operate discreetly. A public feud with the local police wouldn't serve our mission." The implication was clear: don't rock the boat. Don't bring scandal to our doorstep. Loretta recognized it instantly. The velvet glove of systemic preservation. The Institute, for all its progressive posturing, was more concerned with maintaining its comfortable symbiosis with the local power structures than with confronting an injustice that happened to one of its own, particularly a black woman whose very presence had, in the eyes of some, disturbed the carefully curated tranquility of Oak Haven. The covert discrimination didn't end there. Loretta's request for the official police report of the incident met with bureaucratic delays. The Oak Haven PD cited ongoing internal review as a reason for not releasing the full report, providing only a heavily redacted summary that downplayed the officers' aggression and omitted key details of their accusatory language. The neighbor who had filmed the encounter, a mild-mannered history professor named Dr. Evans, contacted Loretta. He had posted his video online, but it was quickly flagged and removed from several platforms for violating community standards. A suspiciously swift and coordinated takedown that hinted at behind-the-scenes pressure. He'd since re-uploaded it to a more resilient, independent platform. But its initial viral spread had been stifled. Then came the more insidious tactics. Anonymous comments began appearing on obscure local blogs and forums, subtly discrediting Loretta, vague insinuations about her arrogance, her aggressiveness, questions about why a supposedly retired agent needed a military attack dog for a walk in a peaceful neighborhood. These were too specific, too targeted to be random internet trolls. It felt orchestrated, an attempt to muddy the waters, to paint her as the provocateur. Even Shadow wasn't spared. A complaint was anonymously filed with Oak Haven Animal Control, alleging a dangerous and uncontrolled dog matching Shadow's description was frequently seen in the area. The complaint was quickly dismissed after Animal Control visited Loretta, observed Shadow, who was impeccably behaved, and reviewed his extensive service records and certifications, which Loretta readily provided. But the intent was clear: harassment, intimidation, an attempt to exploit any avenue to exert pressure. Loretta realized she was facing not just the isolated prejudice of 3 officers, but a more deeply entrenched systemic resistance to accountability. The Oak Haven PD, and perhaps elements within the local establishment, were closing ranks. They were counting on her to tire, to accept the superficial apologies, to quietly move on, as so many were forced to do. They underestimated Loretta Shaw. Each act of covert discrimination, each bureaucratic hurdle, each whispered insinuation, only hardened her resolve. She had endured the silence and the system's betrayals in her youth. She would not do so again. The initial humiliation on that sunlit street was morphing into a calculated battle against a hydra-headed opponent, an opponent that thrived in the shadows of plausible deniability and systemic inertia. The fight for evidence-based justice, she now understood, would be far more complex than a simple confrontation on a sidewalk. It would require her to draw upon every ounce of her strategic acumen, every lesson learned from a lifetime of navigating hostile territories, both foreign and domestic. The tension was no longer about a potential physical altercation. It was about a protracted war of attrition against a system designed to protect itself. The days at the Oak Haven Strategic Institute became a frustrating exercise in compartmentalization for Loretta. By day, she analyzed complex geopolitical threats, her mind navigating intricate webs of international espionage and counterterrorism. By evening, she was immersed in a far more personal, yet equally insidious, battle against a wall of local bureaucratic intransigence and covert character assassination. The redacted police report was a mockery of transparency. The DOJ inquiry, while promised, felt distant and slow, a behemoth grinding its gears while the Oak Haven PD actively worked to control the narrative. The anonymous online smears continued, subtle but persistent, painting her as an outsider, an agitator. Loretta Shaw was not a woman who tolerated being managed, manipulated, or unjustly accused. The lessons from Marcus Jones's professional demise were a constant. Grim reminders: silence and endurance in the face of systemic injustice were tantamount to complicity. The time for quiet observation was over. Action was required. Her first decisive step was to reach out to Dr. Timothy Evans, the history professor who had filmed the encounter. She requested a meeting, not at her temporary residence or his home. Both felt too exposed now, but at a small, independent coffee shop in a neighboring town, a neutral ground where the quiet clatter of cups and the low hum of conversation offered a degree of anonymity. Dr. Evans, a man in his late 50s with a tweed jacket slightly too rumpled and kind eyes magnified by his spectacles, arrived punctually. He carried an old leather satchel that seemed to contain more papers and books than it could comfortably hold. Loretta had initially pegged him as a well-meaning academic, perhaps a little timid, whose act of filming was a momentary surge of civic duty. She was about to discover the quiet, tenacious resolve that often lay beneath such an unassuming exterior. Shadow lay at Loretta's feet beneath a small table, a picture of calm vigilance. His presence was a silent rebuke to the lies being spread. He watched Dr. Evans approach, his tail giving a slight, almost imperceptible thump against the floor, a sign of benign curiosity rather than alarm. Agent Shaw, Loretta. Dr. Evans greeted her, extending a hand. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct. Thank you for reaching out. I've been concerned. About the video, its removal, about what you must be going through. Dr. Evans, Loretta began, her tone direct. I need an unedited, full-resolution copy of your recording. The official channels are proving uncooperative. The DOJ has a copy, of course, but I intend to pursue other avenues to ensure accountability. She expected him to simply agree, perhaps offer sympathy and hand over a USB drive. Instead, Dr. Evans opened his satchel and pulled out not just a flash drive, but a slim binder. I anticipated you might. I have it here, in multiple formats, but I've also taken the liberty of doing a little archival work, if you will. He opened the binder. Inside were printouts of forum discussions, screenshots of deleted comments, and a meticulously compiled timeline. After my initial video was taken down from the mainstream platforms, he explained, his voice low but infused with a surprising passion. I started digging. It wasn't just your encounter. Agent Shaw, these officers, Miller and Davies in particular, have a pattern. I found at least 4 other Oak Haven residents over the past 2 years who've reported encounters ranging from overly aggressive traffic stops to unwarranted wellness checks that felt more like harassment, all targeting people of color or individuals they perceived as not belonging. No video evidence in those cases. Of course, just their word against the officers, and the complaints vanished into the ether of internal reviews. Loretta stared at the dossier, a flicker of surprise, then respect. In her eyes, this mild-mannered historian was a far more formidable ally than she had realized. He hadn't just witnessed an event, he had contextualized it, researched it, understood its place in a larger, uglier picture. His unexpected aid was not merely a recording, but the diligent, meticulous mind of a scholar turned quiet activist. Furthermore, Dr. Evans continued, tapping a section of his notes. The narrative being spun about your dog, Shadow, I found online discussions, clearly seated, attempting to portray him as inherently dangerous before your incident even became widely known locally. It's a preemptive smearing. He looked at Shadow, who met his gaze with calm intelligence. That is a magnificent animal, clearly impeccably trained. The attempt to demonize him is vile. They are trying to discredit the witness, both human and canine, Loretta said, a grim understanding dawning. The scope of the pushback was more organized than she'd initially grasped. Precisely, Dr. Evans affirmed. So, I took another step. I still have the original, high-definition video file. I also made several encrypted copies, stored offline, and I uploaded it to a decentralized, peer-to-peer video sharing platform. It's designed to resist censorship. It's not about viral views, not yet. It's about preservation and undeniable access when the time is right. The link is in here. He tapped the flash drive. This was the opening Loretta needed. His foresight, his quiet diligence, had provided not just evidence, but a secure platform and corroborating context. The first act of resistance began to crystallize in her mind. It wouldn't be a single press conference or a leak to one media outlet that could be pressured or spun. It would be a multi-pronged offensive. Dr. Evans, Loretta said, a new energy in her voice. Your work is invaluable, more than you know. She paused, then outlined her idea. The Department of Justice inquiry will proceed, but it will be slow. The local authorities are compromised. We need to create a situation where ignoring this becomes impossible, where the truth is too widespread to suppress. Her plan was audacious. They would use Dr. Evans' secure link to the video, but they wouldn't just release it randomly. Loretta, drawing on her decades of strategic planning, proposed a targeted release, first, to a consortium of respected, independent investigative journalists known for their tenacity and their focus on civil rights and police misconduct. Second, to national-level civil rights organizations with robust legal teams. Third, to specific oversight committees at the state legislature, bypassing the local old boy network. And finally, she herself would draft a formal, detailed complaint incorporating Dr. Evans' research on prior incidents, and submit it not only to the DOJ, but directly to the governor's office in the state attorney general, referencing the publicly accessible video evidence. The key, Loretta explained, is not just the video of my encounter, but the pattern of behavior Dr. Evans has begun to uncover. My case, because of my background and Shadow's unique involvement, is the lightning rod, but it will illuminate the broader issue. Evans listened intently, his initial academic demeanor now fully replaced by that of a committed collaborator. I can help draft the summaries of the other incidents, ensuring anonymity for the individuals unless they choose to come forward. My skills as a historian are at your disposal, verifying facts, cross-referencing, building the narrative. Shadow. Sensing the shift in energy, the focused intensity between Loretta and Dr. Evans, lifted his head, let out a soft sigh, and rested his chin on Loretta's knee, a gesture of quiet solidarity. He might not understand the words, but he understood the intent, the unified front being formed. His role, for now, was to be the living, breathing refutation of the lies told about him, his very presence a testament to his discipline and loyalty. Over the next 2 days, they worked. Loretta, with her incisive logic and experience in drafting precise, actionable intelligence reports, crafted the overarching complaint. Dr. Evans, with his meticulous attention to detail, compiled the supporting evidence, ensuring every claim about past incidents was carefully sourced from the limited public records and forum discussions he could find, always highlighting the lack of official resolution. They created a package, Loretta's formal complaint, the link to the unassailable video of her encounter, and Dr. Evans' carefully anonymized dossier of related incidents. The first act of resistance was launched not with a bang, but with a series of coordinated, encrypted emails and secure file transfers late one evening from a public library computer, miles from Oak Haven. Loretta pressed send on the final email, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over her. The information was out, delivered to individuals and organizations that had the power to amplify it, to demand answers, to pierce the wall of silence the Oak Haven authorities had tried to erect. There was no immediate, dramatic explosion, but Loretta knew the fuses had been lit. The covert discrimination and systemic exploitation she had faced were about to be dragged into the harsh glare of a much wider and far less forgiving public arena. The fight was far from over, but the terms of engagement had just been irrevocably altered by her first, decisive act of resistance, aided by an unexpected historian who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon is meticulously documented truth. The silence that followed Loretta and Dr. Evans' coordinated information drop was deceptive, like the eerie calm before a storm. For 3 days, Oak Haven seemed to hold its breath. Then, the first tremor hit a scathing investigative piece, co-authored by 2 of the journalists Loretta had contacted, appeared on the homepage of a nationally respected news outlet known for its unflinching exposés. The article, titled Oak Haven's Shadow Policing, Prejudice, and a Pattern of Abuse, was brutal in its precision. It featured a prominent link to Dr. Evans' unedited video, now mirrored on the news organization's own high-traffic servers. It detailed Loretta's encounter with Officers Miller, Davies, and Kensky, juxtaposing their actions with her extensive credentials. Crucially, it also included anonymized accounts from 3 other individuals Dr. Evans had identified, their stories of harassment and intimidation by the same officers painting a damning picture of systemic misconduct. The article exploded online. The video, no longer suppressed, went viral, garnering millions of views within hours. Hashtags like #OakHavenPD and #JusticeForAgentShaw began trending, fueled by outrage and a torrent of comments demanding action. Civil rights organizations issued press releases condemning the Oak Haven Police Department and calling for immediate state and federal intervention. The governor's office, initially non-committal, released a terse statement acknowledging the serious allegations and promising a review. The Oak Haven Town Council, a normally sedate body more accustomed to debating zoning ordinances and local festival budgets, found itself at the epicenter of a national firestorm. An emergency public meeting was announced, ostensibly to address community concerns. It was a poorly disguised attempt at damage control. But the community, now armed with information and galvanized by the media attention, was in no mood for platitudes. The evening of the meeting, the Oak Haven Community Hall was packed to overflowing. Television news vans, their satellite dishes raised like metallic insects, lined the street outside. Inside. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Loretta Shaw arrived not as an accuser seeking a private audience, but as a citizen demanding public accountability. She wore a simple black pantsuit, her national security advisor insignia conspicuously absent. Beside her, calm and resolute, walked Shadow. His presence a quiet but powerful statement. Dr. Evans, looking less the rumpled academic and more a determined advocate, accompanied them, carrying his now famous leather satchel. On the raised dais, Police Chief Marcus Henderson, a man whose career had been built on projecting an image of stoic control, and ironically sharing a first name with Loretta's sacrificed former colleague, looked visibly strained. Alongside him sat Mayor Thompson, a politician whose practiced smile couldn't quite reach his anxious eyes, and a flustered-looking Dr. Alistair Finch from the Oak Haven Strategic Institute, clearly regretting his decision to attend in a show of community solidarity. Officers Miller, Davies, and Kensky were conspicuously absent. Chief Henderson began with a prepared statement, his voice amplified by the microphone but failing to command the room. He spoke of an isolated incident, of officers who may have made errors in judgment, and of the department's commitment to thorough internal reviews and enhanced training. He emphasized the dangers police face daily and appealed for patience and understanding while the proper procedures ran their course. It was a classic deflection, an attempt to minimize and contain. The room listened with a simmering impatience. When the floor was open for public comment, the dam broke. The first speaker was not Loretta, but a young Latina woman whose story had been one of the anonymized accounts in the investigative article. Her voice trembling but clear, she recounted being pulled over by Officer Davies for an alleged broken taillight, which was working perfectly, and then subjected to 20 minutes of intrusive questioning about her immigration status and why she was driving through this part of town. He made me feel like a criminal in my own community. She stated, her eyes locking onto Chief Henderson. And when I tried to file a complaint, it disappeared. Another resident, an elderly black man, stood up. Officer Miller, he and his partner, stopped my grandson last summer, said he looked like someone who'd been seen shoplifting miles away. My grandson is an honor student. They emptied his backpack on the sidewalk, humiliated him for what? For walking while black in Oak Haven. The power dynamic in the room began to visibly shift. The carefully constructed narrative of an isolated incident was crumbling under the weight of lived experiences. Evans, when his turn came, didn't grandstand. He calmly presented a summary of his findings, the pattern of complaints, the consistent dismissal by the Oak Haven PD. He cited dates, times, and the striking similarities in the officers' alleged behaviors. This isn't about a few bad apples, he concluded. This points to a systemic issue of bias and a failure of accountability within the Oak Haven Police Department. Then, Loretta Shaw stepped to the microphone. A hush fell over the room. Shadow sat patiently at her heel, his mere presence a dignified counterpoint to the earlier attempts to portray him as aggressive. Chief Henderson, Mayor Thompson, Dr. Finch, Loretta began, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority that resonated throughout the hall. I am Special Agent Loretta Shaw, retired, for over 30 years. I served this country in the intelligence and counterterrorism fields. I have faced down threats far more significant than 3 misinformed local police officers on a suburban street. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the dais. The video of my encounter with your officers, which you have likely now seen, speaks for itself. What it doesn't fully capture is the casual arrogance, the immediate escalation based on nothing more than my race and my presence. It doesn't fully capture the dismissal of my credentials or the denigration of a service animal who has saved more lives than Officer Davies has likely written traffic tickets. Chief Henderson started to speak. Now, Agent Shaw, I believe the video is subject to interpretation. Loretta cut him off, not with a raised voice, but with an unyielding firmness. There is no interpretation. Chief, for an officer placing his hand on his weapon when questioning a citizen who is offering no threat, there is no interpretation for demanding identification without reasonable suspicion. There is no interpretation for accusing a decorated military working dog of being a dangerous pit bull mix as a pretext for intimidation. She then turned her attention to Dr. Finch. Dr. Finch, you expressed concern to me about the optics for the Institute. You suggested this matter be resolved quietly. Let me be clear, justice is not about quiet resolutions or convenient optics. It is about truth and accountability. Your institute, which purports to engage with critical national security issues, seems to have a blind spot when injustice occurs on its own doorstep, particularly when addressing it might prove uncomfortable. Finch visibly reddened, stammering a response about the Institute's commitment to dialogue. But his words were lost in the murmur of the crowd, who had clearly registered the implication of his attempt to silence Loretta. The final decisive blow to the crumbling edifice of Oak Haven PD. His authority came not from Loretta, but from one of the investigative journalists who had published the initial story. He stood up from the press section, holding a tablet. Chief Henderson, you mentioned in the internal reviews we've just received, via a trusted source within your own department, copies of the unedited body camera footage from all three officers involved in Agent Shaw's stop. Footage that, unlike the heavily redacted report your department provided, clearly shows Officer Davies making racially charged remarks before even engaging with Agent Shaw, and Officer Miller explicitly stating, and I quote, "Let's see if we can shake her up a bit." Would you care to comment on why this footage was withheld from the initial public summary and, apparently, from the Department of Justice? A collective gasp went through the room. Chief Henderson's face went from strained to ashen. Mayor Thompson looked as if he wished the floor would swallow him. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been shattered. The undeniable evidence, the neighbor's video, the victim's testimonies, Dr. Evans' research, and now the leaked body cam footage had created a perfect storm of public indictment. Loretta Shaw simply stood, watching, shadow, sensing the profound shift, let out a soft huff and nudged his head against her hand. The humiliation she had endured on that quiet street was now being answered, not by an act of vengeance, but by the relentless, irrefutable power of truth brought to light in a public forum, with witnesses from every corner of the community now fully awake and demanding change. The battle for justice was far from won, but the wall of denial had been breached, and the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The fallout from the Oak Haven Town Hall meeting was swift and decisive. The leaked body camera footage, with its damning audio of Officers Miller and Davies' premeditated malice and racial bias, removed any lingering doubt about the nature of Loretta Shaw's encounter. Chief Henderson's position became untenable within 24 hours. Faced with overwhelming public pressure, calls for his resignation from state legislators, and the undeniable evidence of a cover-up within his department, he announced his early retirement, effective immediately. Mayor Thompson, deeply embarrassed and fighting for his political survival, publicly apologized to Loretta Shaw and the other residents who had come forward. He pledged full cooperation with the ongoing Department of Justice investigation and announced the immediate suspension without pay of Officers Miller, Davies, and Kensky pending the outcome of that inquiry. The Department of Justice, which had been proceeding with its characteristically deliberate pace, was visibly spurred into accelerated action by the public outcry and the wealth of new evidence. Within weeks, their findings were released, a scathing report that not only substantiated Loretta's claims, but also detailed a pattern of biased policing and inadequate internal accountability within the Oak Haven PD. The report recommended significant reforms, including enhanced de-escalation training, mandatory implicit bias testing, a strengthened civilian oversight board with subpoena power, and a review of all past complaints handled by the officers in question. Officers Miller and Davies were ultimately terminated from the Oak Haven Police Department following the DOJ report and a subsequent internal affairs investigation now conducted under the scrutiny of a newly appointed interim chief, a reformer brought in from an outside department. Officer Kensky, whose involvement was deemed less egregious but still reflected poor judgment and failure to intervene, received a lengthy suspension and was permanently reassigned to a desk job with no public contact. Criminal charges for official misconduct and falsification of reports were filed against Miller and Davies by the State Attorney General's office, a direct result of Loretta's formal complaint and the irrefutable video evidence. Justice, evidence-based and hard-fought, was beginning to be served. The community of Oak Haven, once a quiet enclave where such issues were rarely aired publicly, found itself in a period of intense self-reflection. The town hall meeting had been a catharsis, unearthing grievances that had simmered beneath the surface for years. Neighborhood associations held their own meetings, discussing race, policing, and community trust. Evans, elevated from a quiet academic to a respected local activist, found himself leading workshops on civic engagement and know your rights training. His meticulously compiled dossier became a template for other communities looking to document and challenge similar patterns of misconduct. The Oak Haven Strategic Institute, under pressure from its board and donors who were dismayed by Dr. Finch's handling of the situation and the negative publicity, underwent its own internal reckoning. Dr. Finch was quietly reassigned to a non-public-facing research role, and the Institute issued a formal public apology to Loretta Shaw. They also announced the creation of a new fellowship program focused on studying and addressing systemic inequities in justice and public safety, a direct, if belated, acknowledgement of the issues Loretta's case had brought to their doorstep. Loretta Shaw, who had sought only to walk her dog in peace and to be treated with the dignity afforded any citizen, found herself a reluctant but powerful symbol of change. She received messages of support and gratitude from across the country, from individuals who had faced similar injustices but lacked the resources or platform to fight back effectively. She was invited to speak at conferences on civil rights and police reform, not as a former intelligence operative, but as a citizen who had successfully challenged a prejudiced system. She handled the newfound public attention with the same grace and steely resolve she had displayed throughout the ordeal, in her public statements and interviews. She consistently deflected personal praise, redirecting the focus to the systemic issues at play. "This was never just about me," she stated in one widely circulated interview. "It was about the principle that no one, regardless of their race, their attire, or the neighborhood they are in, should be presumed guilty or treated as inherently suspicious by those sworn to protect and serve. It was about the courage of individuals like Dr. Evans to bear witness, and the necessity of irrefutable evidence in the pursuit of justice." She made a point of highlighting Shadow Sturholm, not just as her protector, but as a symbol of the misjudgment and prejudice inherent in the officers' actions. "They saw a black woman with a dangerous-looking dog," she said. "They failed to see a decorated veteran and a highly trained service animal. Their bias blinded them not only to my identity, but to his shadow. In his own way, exposed their ignorance as much as any video camera." Shadow, often by her side during these appearances, became a beloved figure in his own right, his calm demeanor and clear intelligence a constant, visible rebuttal to the attempts to demonize him. The legal proceedings against Miller and Davies moved forward. Both men eventually pled guilty to lesser charges to avoid a lengthy trial. But their careers in law enforcement were over, and their convictions, however minor, served as a public record of their misconduct. The civil suits filed by Loretta and several other victims, whose cases were reopened following Dr. Evans' research, resulted in significant settlements from the town of Oak Haven. Settlements that included not just monetary compensation, but also commitments to specific, measurable reforms within the police department. Loretta did not stay in Oak Haven permanently. Her work as a national security strategic advisor was too vital. her expertise too much in demand, but she left an indelible mark on the community before departing. She attended one final town meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different, not one of anger and confrontation, but of constructive dialogue and a shared commitment to building a more just and equitable community. She was presented with a key to the city, not by a shamefaced Mayor Thompson, but by a newly elected mayor, a reform-minded community leader who had emerged in the wake of the scandal. As Loretta Shaw prepared to leave Oakhaven, Shadow at her side, she reflected on the unexpected turn her brief consultancy had taken. The racist cops who had cornered her dad, in their arrogance, unleashed a chain of events they could never have foreseen. They had intended to humiliate and intimidate a black woman they deemed out of place. Instead, they had inadvertently empowered a community, exposed a pattern of systemic abuse, and provided a national platform for a woman whose entire life had been a testament to courage, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Her dog, trained for war but embodying peace and discipline, had been the catalyst, the steadfast guardian whose silent intervention had initiated the public unraveling of deeply entrenched prejudice. The aftermath was not just about justice served in one instance, it was about a community awakened and a powerful reminder that the fight for equality, however daunting, could be won with truth, evidence, and the unwavering courage to resist. Loretta Shaw and her remarkable dog Shadow had become an enduring symbol of that fight.